The crack of splintering wood echoed down Maple Street like a gunshot, followed by the sharp twang of severed strings. Mrs. Henderson's coffee mug froze halfway to her lips as she watched from her kitchen window. The teenager's violin lay in 3 jagged pieces across the sidewalk, its mahogany body split open like a broken heart. "What did you just do?" Marcus Williams stared at the wreckage of his grandmother's violin, his voice barely above a whisper. The 15-year-old had been sitting on the curb outside the Riverside Estates Community Center, practicing scales for his American folk music project, when the woman in the crisp white tennis outfit had stormed across the street. "I did what someone should have done 20 minutes ago," Karen Whitmore snapped, her manicured fingers still gripping the mailbox post she'd used as a weapon. "This is a respectable neighborhood, not some plantation where you can sit around playing field songs all day long." Marcus felt his knees go weak. The violin had belonged to his great-grandmother, passed down through 4 generations of his family. She'd played it in church choirs across the South, had taught his grandmother the same spirituals and folk songs that Marcus was now learning for his high school music appreciation class. The assignment was simple research and perform traditional American music. He'd chosen the songs his family had preserved for over a century. "Ma'am, I was just practicing for school," Marcus said, his voice cracking as he knelt to gather the pieces. The bridge had snapped clean off, the strings curled like dead vines around the fragments. "This was my great-grandmother's violin." "Don't you dare try to make me feel guilty with your sob story." Karen's voice rose to a shriek that drew neighbors from their porches. "I've lived in this community for 12 years, and I'm not about to let some teenager sit out here playing slave songs that make decent people feel uncomfortable. You want to practice music? Play something American for once." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He'd been playing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Wade in the Water, songs that were as American as apple pie, woven into the very fabric of this country's history. His music teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had specifically assigned these pieces because they represented the African-American contribution to American folk music. They were American songs, created by American people, born from American struggles and American hopes. "These are American songs," Marcus said quietly, still kneeling on the sidewalk. "They were created here, by my ancestors who helped build this country." Build this country. Karen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "They picked cotton and caused nothing but trouble. And now you're out here trying to make the rest of us feel guilty about it with your propaganda music. Well, I'm not having it in my neighborhood." From her kitchen window, Mrs. Henderson watched the scene unfold with growing horror. She'd known Marcus since he was 8 years old, had watched him walk to school every morning with his violin case strapped to his back. He was a good kid, polite and respectful, always stopping to help elderly neighbors with their groceries or to pet their dogs. She'd enjoyed listening to him practice on the community center steps, had even requested he play Amazing Grace last month when her husband was in the hospital. But she also knew Karen Whitmore, and she knew that crossing her meant months of harassment, code violation reports, and homeowners association complaints. Karen had made life hell for the Johnson family when they'd painted their shutters the wrong shade of blue. She'd gotten the Nguyen family fined for their garden being 2 inches taller than regulation height. She ruled the Riverside Estates Homeowners Association like a personal fiefdom, and nobody dared challenge her authority. So Mrs. Henderson watched in silence as Marcus carefully gathered every piece of his shattered violin, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. She watched as Karen stood over him like a victorious warrior, her hands on her hips, her face flushed with righteous anger. She watched as other neighbors peered from behind curtains and cracked doors, all of them witnessing the destruction, but none of them brave enough to intervene. "Let me make this crystal clear," Karen continued, her voice carrying across the street. "I don't want to see you out here again with any instruments, playing any of that divisive music. This is a family neighborhood, and we don't need you stirring up racial tensions with your performance art." Marcus looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "It's not performance art. It's my heritage. These songs kept my family alive through slavery, through Jim Crow, through everything. They're part of who I am." "Well, keep your heritage to yourself," Karen snapped. "The rest of us don't need to be subjected to it. Now get off my street before I call the police and tell them you've been harassing residents." The threat hung in the air like a thundercloud. Marcus knew, as every black teenager in America knew, that a call to the police could escalate beyond anything he could control. He gathered the last fragments of his violin, stood slowly, and began walking toward home. Each step felt like a surrender, each breath like a failure to honor the strong women who had passed this instrument down to him. Karen watched him go with satisfaction, then turned toward her house. She'd done the right thing, she told herself. She'd protected her property values and her community's peace. The last thing Riverside Estates needed was some teenager causing trouble with provocative music choices. She'd nipped this problem in the bud before it could spiral out of control. What Karen didn't know was that Dr. Amara Jenkins had been pulling into her driveway just as the violin met its violent end. Dr. Jenkins, who lived 2 houses down from the community center, had heard the entire confrontation from her car. She'd sat frozen behind the wheel, listening to Karen's tirade with growing disbelief and rage. Dr. Jenkins was not just another resident of Riverside Estates. She was the state director of Black Cultural Heritage Arts, appointed by the governor 3 years earlier to preserve and promote African American cultural contributions throughout the state. She oversaw a budget of $12 million, managed 17 museums and cultural centers, and had just returned from a UNESCO conference on cultural preservation in Paris. She'd also grown up in these same streets, back when Riverside Estates was a working-class neighborhood, before gentrification had transformed it into an exclusive enclave. She remembered when Marcus's grandmother, Mrs. Dorothy Williams, had been the neighborhood's unofficial music teacher, giving free lessons to any child who wanted to learn. She remembered the summer concerts in the community center, where Mrs. Williams would play that same violin, while children sang along to spirituals and folk songs. Dr. Jenkins sat in her car for a full 5 minutes after Marcus disappeared down the street, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. She'd spent her entire career fighting to preserve exactly the kind of musical heritage that Karen had just destroyed. She'd written grants to save old gospel recordings, had organized festivals to celebrate folk traditions, had given lectures at universities about the importance of keeping these cultural memories alive. And now, on her own street, she'd watched a bigot destroy a piece of living history because she found it inconvenient. Dr. Jenkins finally got out of her car and walked slowly to her front door, her mind already working. She knew Marcus and his family well. His grandmother Dorothy had been one of her mentors when she was starting her career, had shared stories and songs that had shaped Dr. Jenkins' understanding of her own cultural heritage. Dorothy had passed away 2 years ago, and Dr. Jenkins had spoken at her funeral about the importance of the musical legacy she was leaving behind. That violin had been Dorothy's most treasured possession, and now it was splinters on the sidewalk because Karen Whitmore couldn't tolerate the sound of American history. Inside her house, Dr. Jenkins went straight to her home office and pulled up the security camera footage from her front door system. The cameras had a wide-angle view that captured most of the street, including the community center steps where Marcus had been practicing. She rewound the footage to 30 minutes earlier and watched the entire incident unfold in high definition. The recording was devastating. It showed Marcus sitting peacefully on the steps, His violin case open beside him. Sheet music spread across his lap. He was clearly practicing, stopping occasionally to consult his music or tune his instrument. He wasn't bothering anyone, wasn't blocking traffic, wasn't doing anything except exactly what thousands of music students do every day practicing his craft. Then, Karen appeared in the frame, marching across the street with obvious anger. The camera caught every word she said, every gesture she made, every moment of the confrontation. It captured her snatching the violin from Marcus's hands. It captured her raising it above her head like a club. And it captured the moment she brought it crashing down against the mailbox post. Most importantly, it captured her words. Every slur, every stereotype, every racist assumption was preserved in digital clarity. The recording showed beyond any doubt that this was not a simple noise complaint or a misunderstanding about community regulations. This was a hate crime, pure and simple, motivated by racial prejudice and cultural intolerance. Dr. Jenkins saved the footage to multiple drives and began making phone calls. Her first call was to Marcus's mother, Patricia Williams, who worked as a nurse at the county hospital. Patricia listened in stunned silence as Dr. Jenkins described what she'd witnessed, her voice breaking when she learned about the violin's destruction. "That was my mother's violin," Patricia whispered. "Marcus has been playing it since he was 7 years old. She taught him those songs herself before she passed. They were her favorite pieces, the ones she learned from her own grandmother." "I know," Dr. Jenkins said gently. "Your mother was a treasure. Patricia, she helped preserve songs that might have been lost forever. And now we're going to make sure that what happened to Marcus today never happens to another child." Her second call was to the district attorney's office. Dr. Jenkins had worked with DA Rebecca Martinez on several cases involving the destruction of cultural artifacts and hate crimes. Martinez was a tough prosecutor who took civil rights violations seriously, and she was particularly concerned about crimes against children. "You have video evidence of the entire incident?" Martinez asked, her voice sharp with interest. "Crystal clear footage from multiple angles," Dr. Jenkins confirmed. "The defendant's statements clearly indicate racial motivation. She specifically mentioned slavery, used the term slave songs, and told the victim to play something American while destroying an instrument that belonged to his great-grandmother. "Send me everything you have," Martinez said. "I'll review it tonight, and we can file charges tomorrow morning. This sounds like a textbook case of hate-motivated destruction of property, possibly with enhancement for targeting a minor." Dr. Jenkins's third call was to the local NAACP chapter president, who immediately began mobilizing community support. Her fourth call was to the school district's cultural arts coordinator, who confirmed that Marcus was indeed working on an approved assignment, and that the destroyed violin was a significant piece of cultural heritage. By the time Karen Whitmore was settling down for her evening wine and reality TV shows, completely unaware of the legal storm gathering around her, Dr. Jenkins had assembled a coalition of community leaders, legal advocates, and cultural preservationists who were all committed to ensuring that justice was served. The next morning, Karen woke to find 2 police officers standing on her doorstep with an arrest warrant. The charges were severe, hate-motivated destruction of property, intimidation of a minor, and violation of the state's Cultural Heritage Protection Act. The last charge was particularly serious, as it carried enhanced penalties for the destruction of items with historical or cultural significance. "There must be some mistake," Karen protested as the officers explained her rights. "I was just dealing with a noise complaint. The kid was disturbing the peace with his music." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of the entire incident," Officer Rodriguez said patiently. You're being charged with multiple felonies. You need to come with us now." Karen's arrest made the local news within hours. The story of a homeowners association president destroying a teenager's family heirloom because she objected to traditional African American music struck a nerve throughout the community. The video footage, released by the district attorney's office, went viral on social media platforms, drawing outrage from across the state and beyond. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling to process what had happened. He'd told his mother about the incident when he got home, but seeing it on the news, watching strangers discuss his humiliation and his family's loss, made it feel surreal and overwhelming. The violin he'd practiced on every day for 8 years was gone, and with it, a direct connection to his great-grandmother's memory. "I don't want to be famous for this," he told his mother as they watched the coverage together. "I just wanted to practice for my assignment. Now everyone's going to know me as the kid whose violin got broken by a racist." Patricia Williams held her son close, her own heart breaking for his loss. "Your great-grandmother would be proud of how you handled yourself," she said softly. "You showed dignity and strength in the face of ignorance. That's the real lesson here." Dr. Jenkins visited the Williams family that evening, bringing with her a proposal that would transform the tragedy into something meaningful. She'd been working with the State Cultural Arts Council to create a new program supporting young musicians from underserved communities, and she wanted to make Marcus the first recipient of what would become the Dorothy Williams Memorial Music Scholarship. "Your great-grandmother's violin is gone," Dr. Jenkins told Marcus as they sat in the family's living room. "But her legacy and your talent are still here. We can't bring back that particular instrument, but we can make sure that what happened to you never happens to another young musician." The scholarship program would provide instruments, lessons, and performance opportunities for young people interested in preserving traditional American music. It would be funded through grants from the State Arts Council, private donations, and, if the legal case was successful, restitution payments from Karen Whitmore. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the magnitude of what Dr. Jenkins was proposing. "You really think something good can come from this?" "I know it can," Dr. Jenkins said firmly. "Your great-grandmother spent her life sharing music with young people, passing down songs that carried the stories of our ancestors. This scholarship will let us continue that work on a much larger scale. It's not just about replacing one violin. It's about protecting an entire musical tradition." As the legal case moved forward, community support for Marcus and his family grew stronger. The Riverside Estates Homeowners Association held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Karen Whitmore from all leadership positions. Residents who had remained silent during the original incident now spoke out publicly, expressing their shame at not intervening and their determination to create a more inclusive community. Mrs. Henderson, who had watched the destruction from her kitchen window, became one of the most vocal advocates for change. She organized a neighborhood fundraiser to purchase a new violin for Marcus, and she worked with other residents to establish new community guidelines that explicitly protected residents' right to practice music and express their cultural heritage. "I should have done something that day," she told a reporter from the local newspaper. "I should have gone outside and stood up for that boy. My silence made me complicit in what happened, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I can make sure it never happens again." The case against Karen Whitmore moved swiftly through the legal system. The video evidence was so clear and damning that her attorney advised her to accept a plea bargain rather than risk a jury trial. The prosecution's case was overwhelming multiple felony charges, clear evidence of racial motivation, and the destruction of a culturally significant artifact. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. and the courtroom was packed with community members who had come to show support for Marcus and his family. Dr. Jenkins sat in the front row, wearing a pin that featured a photograph of Dorothy Williams playing her violin at a church concert 50 years earlier. Karen's attorney, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, rose to address the court. "Your Honor, my client accepts responsibility for her actions and wishes to make amends for the harm she has caused. She understands that her behavior was inappropriate and hurtful." Judge Patricia Hernandez, a Latina woman in her 50s who had presided over numerous hate crime cases, was not impressed by the tepid apology. "Ms. Whitmore, please stand and address the court directly." Karen rose slowly, her face pale and drawn. The past month had been a nightmare of legal bills, media attention, and social ostracism. She'd lost her job at the marketing firm. Her husband had filed for divorce, and she'd been forced to move out of Riverside Estates after receiving numerous threats from outraged community members. "I'm sorry for what I did," she said quietly, not looking at Marcus or his family. "I made a mistake in the heat of the moment." Judge Hernandez's expression hardened. "Ms. Whitmore, I've reviewed the video evidence in this case multiple times. What you did was not a mistake made in the heat of the moment. It was a deliberate act of destruction motivated by racial prejudice and cultural intolerance. You systematically destroyed a family heirloom while berating a child for practicing traditional American music. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a hate crime." The judge continued, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "The violin you destroyed belonged to Dorothy Williams, a woman who spent her life preserving and sharing African American musical traditions. She taught children to play spirituals and folk songs that are an integral part of American cultural heritage. You didn't just destroy an instrument. You attacked the very essence of what makes America culturally rich and diverse." Marcus sat between his mother and Dr. Jenkins, listening to the judge's words with a mixture of vindication and sadness. Nothing could bring back his great-grandmother's violin, but hearing the court acknowledge the significance of what had been lost felt like a validation of his family's heritage. Judge Hernandez announced the sentence: 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service at local cultural centers, mandatory counseling for racial bias, and restitution payments totaling $50,000. The restitution would fund the Dorothy Williams Memorial Music Scholarship for its first 5 years, ensuring that other young musicians would have the opportunities that Marcus had nearly lost. Additionally, the judge said, "You are ordered to attend a series of educational programs about African American cultural contributions to American music. You will write a formal letter of apology to be read at a community healing ceremony, and you will be banned from any leadership positions in homeowners associations for a period of 5 years." As the courtroom began to empty, Dr. Jenkins approached Marcus and his family. "Your great-grandmother would be proud," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just of how you've handled this situation, but of what's going to come from it. The scholarship program is already getting inquiries from young musicians across the state." Marcus nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "It still doesn't feel real," he admitted. "A month ago, I was just trying to practice for a school assignment. Now, there's going to be a scholarship program with my great-grandmother's name on it." "That's how change happens," Dr. Jenkins said. "It starts with one person standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. You showed incredible courage that day, and now other young people are going to benefit from your strength." The community healing ceremony was held 3 weeks later in the Riverside Estates Community Center, the same building where Marcus had been practicing when his violin was destroyed. The event drew hundreds of people from across the city, including the mayor, several city council members, and representatives from multiple cultural organizations. Marcus performed that evening, playing Wade in the Water on a new violin that had been donated by a local music shop. The instrument was beautiful, with a rich, warm tone that filled the community center with sound. But as he played, Marcus couldn't help thinking about his great-grandmother's violin, about the hands that had held it before his, about the songs it had carried through generations of struggle and triumph. When he finished the piece, the audience rose to their feet in applause that seemed to go on forever. Dr. Jenkins took the stage to announce the official launch of the Dorothy Williams Memorial Music Scholarship, which had already received enough donations to support 20 students in its first year. Dorothy Williams believed that music was a bridge between generations. Dr. Jenkins said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system. She believed that songs could carry the stories of our ancestors, could teach us about resilience and hope and the power of community. Tonight, we honor her memory by ensuring that her legacy will continue through the young musicians who will benefit from this scholarship. The ceremony concluded with a community sing-along of "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," the same song that Marcus had been practicing when his violin was destroyed. As voices joined together in harmony, filling the community center with music that had sustained generations of Americans through hardship and joy, Marcus felt something shift inside him. The pain of losing his great-grandmother's violin would always be with him, but it was now accompanied by something else, a sense of purpose, a connection to something larger than himself, and the knowledge that his family's musical heritage would continue to grow and flourish through the lives of other young musicians. Karen Whitmore did not attend the healing ceremony, but she did fulfill her court-ordered community service at the African American Cultural Center downtown. For 200 hours, she sorted archival materials, cleaned display cases, and listened to stories about the cultural traditions she had tried to silence. The work was humbling and educational, forcing her to confront the depth of her own ignorance and prejudice. Her letter of apology, read aloud at the ceremony by Dr. Jenkins, was brief but seemed genuine. I destroyed something beautiful and irreplaceable because I was ignorant and afraid. I cannot undo the harm I caused, but I can commit to learning from my mistakes and working to be a better person. I hope that the scholarship created in Dorothy Williams' name will help heal the wounds I inflicted on this community. As autumn turned to winter, the Dorothy Williams Memorial Music Scholarship began accepting applications from young musicians across the state. The program provided not just instruments and lessons, but also opportunities to perform at cultural events, to learn from master musicians, and to connect with their own cultural heritage through music. Marcus, now a junior in high school, became the scholarship's first student ambassador, helping to review applications and mentor younger musicians. He performed regularly at cultural events, sharing the songs his great-grandmother had taught him and learning new pieces from other traditions as well. The violin that had been destroyed on an October afternoon was gone forever, but the music it had carried lived on in new hands, new voices, and new hearts. Dr. Jenkins often thought about Dorothy Williams as she watched young musicians perform at scholarship events, imagining how proud the elderly woman would be to see her legacy growing and spreading throughout the community. The Riverside Estates neighborhood had changed as well. The community center now hosted regular concerts featuring traditional American music from all cultural backgrounds. Children gathered on the same steps where Marcus had been practicing, learning songs from their grandparents and sharing them with their friends. The Homeowners Association had rewritten its rules to explicitly protect residents' right to practice music and express their cultural heritage. Mrs. Henderson, who had become one of the scholarship's most dedicated volunteers, often stood at her kitchen window watching young musicians practice on the community center steps. She no longer felt the shame and regret that had consumed her after witnessing Marcus's violin being destroyed. But she never forgot the lesson of that day. That silence in the face of injustice makes us all complicit in hatred. On a warm spring evening, nearly 6 months after the destruction of his great-grandmother's violin, Marcus sat on the community center steps with his new instrument, practicing for an upcoming performance at the State Cultural Arts Festival. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the sidewalk where the broken pieces of wood and metal had once scattered. As he played Amazing Grace, the same song his great-grandmother had performed at countless church services and community gatherings, Marcus felt her presence in the music. The violin in his hands was different from the one she had played, but the songs were the same. The love was the same, and the determination to keep the music alive was the same. A group of children had gathered to listen, sitting cross-legged on the grass nearby. When Marcus finished the piece, one of them raised her hand. "Will you teach us that song?" she asked. "My grandmother used to sing it, but I don't remember all the words." Marcus smiled and positioned his violin under his chin. "Let's start with the melody," he said. "Once you know the tune, the words will come naturally." As the children began to hum along with his playing, their voices joining in tentative harmony, Marcus thought about his great-grandmother's hands on this same violin, teaching his grandmother the same songs, passing down the same musical heritage that was now flowing through a new generation of young voices. The violin that had been destroyed was gone, but the music lived on. It lived in Marcus's skilled fingers as they moved across the strings, in the children's voices as they learned to sing along, in Dr. Jenkins' work to preserve cultural heritage across the state, and in the scholarship program that would support young musicians for years to come. The hatred that had shattered wood and metal could not destroy the songs themselves, could not silence the voices that carried them, could not break the chain of cultural transmission that connected past to present to future. The music was stronger than the hate. The community was stronger than the individual prejudice. And the legacy of Dorothy Williams was stronger than the violence that had tried to silence it. As darkness fell over Riverside Estates and the children dispersed to their homes, Marcus played one final song, "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot," the piece he had been practicing when his world had been turned upside down by a moment of shocking violence. But now the song carried different meanings, new harmonies, fresh hope. The sweet chariot was still coming, still carrying people home, still offering the promise of redemption and justice and peace. And Marcus Williams, with his great-grandmother's songs flowing through his fingers and his heart, was ready to keep playing until it arrived.